Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm Nicolas Véron. It's my pleasure to introduce this last session of the year of the financial statement series at the Peterson Institute. But perhaps more importantly, I want to do something I don't do often enough, which is pay tribute to the teams that makes this series possible. And especially Sarah Chu has been with us at Peterson since April 2022. This is her last month at the Institute, so her last session of financial statements, and Sarah has been more instrumental than anybody else, including myself, in making this series happen in the last 2.5 years. So thank you, Sarah, so much for what you did for the series and for the Institute, and best wishes as you move to new opportunity. I also want to pay tribute to Jessica Parada. Jessica is one of the event specialists at Peterson. She has been a true pillar of strength and efficiency and stability for the series. So also thanks to you, Jessica, and best holiday wishes. Today we'll talk about innovation and entrepreneurship and look at a special case, which is an institution in France, Bpifrance, which Arnaud Caudoux will present. Arnaud studied at École Polytechnique near Paris and at École des Ponts et Chaussées. He started his career as a consultant in 1997 for Accenture and in 2001 for A.T. Kearney. And in 2003, he joined what at the time was called Sofaris, which was a public agency for loan guarantees directed at small companies and high-growth companies. He will tell us more about it. Went into several transformations. It became Oseo in 2005, Bpifrance in 2013. Meanwhile, Arnaud was in charge of risk management. He became the deputy CEO of Oseo in 2008, then the CFO of Bpifrance in 2013, and in 2015, his current position as deputy CEO in charge of finance, risk, IT systems, and also the loan guarantee business. Arnaud has also been a board member of Technique FMC, a big oil equipment company since 2017, of United, I not pronounce it well. It's an innovative bank that Arnaud has been on the board of since 2019, and he's been involved in many French debates about financing SMEs and entrepreneurship. Josh Lerner is here for the second time this year in the series. Thank you, Josh, for repeat performance. You came in April, and again now, Josh is of course, one of the world's best-known academics specializing in entrepreneurship and its financing. He studied at Yale College and at Harvard, where he got his PhD in 1992. He has worked at Harvard Business School ever since. He's now the Jacob H. Schiff Professor of Investment Banking. And Josh is the author of innumerable articles, but also too many books that I could quote them all. I will just mention his first book, with Paul Gompers, The Venture Capital Cycle in 1999, a book which is important for our topic, Boulevard of Broken Dreams, why public efforts to boost entrepreneurship and VC and venture capital have failed and what to do about it, published first in 2009, and also more recently with Victoria Ivashina, Patient Capital, The Challenges and Promises of Long-Term Investing at Princeton University Press, 2019. Josh got numerous awards. I will only mention the Swedish government's Global Award for Entrepreneurship and Research in 2010. He's also occasionally consulting. He is a managing partner at Bella Private Markets and has enormous connectivity with the innovation and venture capital world in the US and globally. He actually joins us from Riyadh. I have to finish this introduction with a personal disclosure. As many of you know, my brother works in the venture capital industry. I have all my savings, or most of my savings, in his funds, but this has nothing to do with this session. So let me make sure that you know my interests, but that doesn't make me less neutral in this topic. With that, Arnaud, I will move your slides, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nicolas. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to introduce BPI. To those of you who don't know us yet, I guess most of you. So I'll try to be quick on the slides, just a few of them. Basically, what we are now in France is, and what we have done in the past 10 years is put together if we can switch to the second slide, please, is put together the development bank for French entrepreneurs, small companies to large companies, so granting loans, subsidies for innovation initiatives and guarantees to the French entrepreneurs. The innovation agency, we are also the sovereign fund in a sense, meaning we manage money to invest in equity in French company. And we have VCA, the export credit agency, so we grant credit insurance for export finance, and we do some export finance ourselves. So I guess the aim was to put all the tools you can use, all the financial tools you can use as an entrepreneur, if you are French, within Bpifrance, so you have an easy access to them, and so we can, play among these different levels to find the best solution for any given situation and any given kind of company. So this is a very institutional slide to start with, but basically to say that we are not an agency per se, we are a company, we are a bank, basically. We are regulated by the ECB. I guess we'll get back to that later on in the discussion. But we really operate both as a general partner investing private equity or investing equity in listed companies. We operate as a bank when we lend money, which is the core of what we do. And we operate under direct supervision from the ECB, just same level playing field as other commercial banks in France and Europe, and also supervised obviously by the IMF, which is the market authority for France when we do investments. Very important to bear that in mind. We are not civil servants, we are professional bankers and professional investors operating in partnership with commercial banks and most private equity and venture funds in France, and for that matter on the equity side also sometimes in Europe. To the next slide, very specific thing, if you compare us to other most development banks, we are a network of 50 agencies across France, so we have branches all over the French territory from which we operate. So the key for us is to be in close proximity on the ground with entrepreneurs. So we have around, out of the 4,000 people which are now the core of Bpifrance staff, 1,500 are in these agencies, and they operate on a daily basis. They visit companies, they visit factories, they receive entrepreneurs, but they are 100% on the ground, close to those entrepreneurs. We also work in partnership. We belong to the French state, 50%. We belong to Caisse des Dépôts, also 50%. So mostly it's a company held by the French state. Actually, 2% are held by commercial banks, so it's not exactly 100%. It's 49 state, 49 Caisse des Dépôts, which is proxy of the state. We can get back to that if you want. And 2% commercial banks, which is interestingly stuck in the middle. We also work with regional authorities, which are delegated a part of the economic policy in France. And we support most companies one way or the other across France, and we've been doing such for the past 10 years, 11 years now as Bpifrance, and very important to have in mind also for the past almost 100 years, if you go back to what were the previous companies that we have merged into Bpifrance. So it's not something that was set up out of the blue 10 or 11 years ago. It was a bank which was already the merger of many public banks back in the years. It was a fund of funds investing as an LP in private equity and venture funds in France, which dates back to the mid-90s. And it was also a direct investor, which was later created, I guess, 2007. And we merged all these parts to make up what is now Bpifrance. Same thing, the ECA part was COFAS and has been existing also, I think, ever since the Second World War, so for the past 75 years. So old parts, a new company, but deep expertise, deep knowledge of the French companies, and deep expertise of our businesses. To the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is again the different businesses we operate. Financing is roughly now 50 billion euros of outstanding loans, 100% French companies. Guarantees we give to French commercial banks to take usually half of the risk they take on specific kind of loans. That's around 20 billion euros outstanding. Equity, we manage now, I guess, 54 billion euros of assets. 30 billions are our own funds. 20 billions are third-party funds, either public or private, depending on the strategies we operate. International is mostly insurance financing. So again, being the ECA, we have probably around 70 billion euros of outstanding insurance on export finance. Digital is just that we do some lending to very small companies through 100% digitalized operations. Creation is something very specific. We have a lot of volunteers in France, which are past entrepreneurs, around 70,000 of them who accompany new entrepreneurs, and they are regrouped in associations which can extend soft loans to new entrepreneurs. So they bring advices and they bring very little amounts of finance. We do help these associations to finance those loans. Consulting is something we created from scratch, actually, in 2014-15, realizing that bringing money was fine, but probably not enough to make sure we change the game. So consulting is us bringing experts from across the board and trying to make them suitable to bring some consulting to mid-sized companies. Mid-sized companies, at least in France, are not used to using consultants. And we felt that was something that could be enhanced and corrected. So we now provide around 5,000 consulting missions every year, which is 5 to 10 days. So very small missions, very focused, very operational, but across the field, from marketing to strategy to digital to export. And innovation, I guess we will talk a lot about that. We are a French innovation agency. In 2023, very specific year, we brought almost 10 billions of innovation finance, grants, subsidies, soft loans. That's exceptionally high. We'll get back to 3 to 5 billions per year. And I have a slide specific on that afterwards. And everything, again, really the key is that all we do in this circle is centered around the entrepreneur. So we do everything that addresses the entrepreneur. It may seem a lot, I don't know, but it's relevant to us if it's finance and if it's entrepreneur related. These are our target figures for the next 5 years. So roughly, I just gave you the figures on a yearly basis, nothing really different. We have specific focuses, which are reindustrialization, quite a common theme, but very important to France. Industry today is less than 11% of French GDP, so it's a big stake to get back to 12 or 13. Even that is a big it is a big challenge today, so we spend a lot of time on that. Climate and mostly energy transition is also we can use this one. So the three big ones are industry, climate, mostly energy transition, both on solution providing and on helping classic companies to negotiate the energy transition. We have obviously a tech plan, which is switching from classic tech, if I may say, to deep tech, has been switching for the past 5 years. So more complex but more interesting projects, more interesting but more complex to finance projects. And we have secondary goals, which I can go across very rapidly. Basically, doubling the number of entrepreneurs is one of our also theme. We want France to be more entrepreneur focused. We want more entrepreneurs in this country, and this is something which is happening today in France. You have one student in what we call grandes écoles, so let's say the upper kind of studies you can do. 1 out of 3 wants to be an entrepreneur, which was definitely not true 10 or 15 years ago. So the culture is changing, and we do what we can to foster that. As an innovation agency, as I mentioned today, 9 billion euros in 23. Out of that, there's 2 ways to operate. One is bottom up, if you will. So we can provide relatively small amounts to projects, to people who will come in our branches and say, okay, I have this kind of projects, and we don't have any selectivity on the type of technology, on the type of innovation. We will judge the quality of the project, the quality of entrepreneurs, etc. But we won't say for this kind of helps, okay, I want this kind of technology, etc. So this is around 1 billion euro per year. And this is an average of probably around 1 million, switching from 100,000 to 10 million per project. And then we have top-down projects, which are defined with priorities defined by the government. And we will call for projects and distribute much larger amounts of money. And this is obviously government money, not our money. But we operate as an expert and we provide the operations for the French states. Interestingly, we have financed 80% of the French unicorns. So let's say we didn't miss many of them, a few of them, but not too many of them. And we are clearly a leading role in this part of the economic policy of France. Equity, as I mentioned, almost 54 billion euros under management now, spread across 3 strategies. One is fund investment. So we operate as an LP for most GPs, LPs, so limited partners, investing in teams managing money and investing in companies across the world, but centered in France. And we do that for the investment companies doing the 2 strategies we do ourselves. One is venture, around 7 billion euros, and one is what we call capital development. Always difficult to describe, but basically minority investment in profitable companies of all stages. It can be very old companies, it can be newer companies, but profitable. So EBITDA positive, let's say. And this is larger because we can invest, and we do invest a lot in small companies, around 100 of them per year for an average of 1 million. We also invest in very large companies, listed companies, hence the amount of almost 30 billion euros. In numbers of deals, therefore, it's very large. We are the number 3 in the world in terms of number of deals, because we do a lot of investments in very small companies. Deals, again, around 1 million, 2 million, 1 to 5 million euros, let's say. So small SMEs opening their capital for the first time and, accessing financial professional shareholders for the first time with us and generally with another partner. Fund of fund, very interesting. This is what France has used to promote venture capital in the past 30 years. We usually invest 15 to 25% of the money a fund will manage. We have now 18 billion under management. We have a lot of investment companies, around 200 GPs, and that represents in the portfolio almost a bit more than 5,000 companies. So it's very large. It is profitable if you do it across the cycle, as we have done it for the past 30 years. It is also profitable if you keep focusing on avoiding the worst funds, obviously, and if you have a steady strategy, and if you focus on promoting new teams, what we call first-time teams and first-time funds. Very difficult to raise money when you create a new investment company. But if you look at this closely and select them rightly, that can be both very useful to the economy and very profitable as an investor. So this is what we do. Last focus, and I guess I'll be around the 10 minutes, just to say, again, our investment strategy is being always minority. As a public company, we don't want to be a majority shareholder, rather patient. That's one of the reasons why we exist. We can invest a bit more longer times than classic investors. 8 to 10 years would be the sweet spot for us. Obviously, we have to be profitable, non-negotiable. It has to be, when we invest, has to have some sense for us as a public company. So there has to be some kind of public interest, either for employment, for innovation, for competitiveness, ideally for the 3 of them. And we do not participate in most of LBOs. We do participate as minority shareholders sometimes, but that's not the core focus. Last one is large venture, which is the big chunk of what we do as a direct venture investor. The most difficult part of venture in France is growth venture capital, so large late stage investments. We've been doing that for the past 11 years now. and it's been growing steadily. So what you see on the right is not our investments, and by the way, it's not millions, it's billions. This is the global amounts of money invested in more than 20 million euro single investments by year in France. So you see a rather steady growth until 2020. Obviously, starting in 2020, things get a bit weird. So we had this kind of bubble in 21, 22, which we followed, but which was quite impressive looking back. We went from 4 billion to 10 to almost 12 billion in 22. Going down now in 23 and 24, we're around 5 billion, same in 24, by the way. And the names there are a few of the companies we have financed, as you can, probably you don't know them if you're not French. Well, some of them you may know, but that range is from, well, there's a bit of everything in there. Ofkin is a biotech company, a lot of AI in biotech. Insect is agri-food, animal proteins. Swile is a fintech, etc. I guess I'm through with the 10 minutes.
Thank you so much. That was masterful. Josh.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you so much for the chance to talk about these issues and think about some of these questions. I think in a way, one of the interesting challenges that, BPI and I think policymakers really virtually everywhere in the world face is this balancing act between what you can describe as, in American language, sort of Main Street businesses on the one hand, and what you call gazelles or high potential businesses on the other. In the sense that we know that in virtually every Western economy, the really high potential businesses, in terms of the ones which are likely to be creating a lot of the jobs and so forth, are a really small fraction in terms of number. They're a reasonable fraction in terms of employment, but still they're likely to be dwarfed by the much more traditional kinds of businesses. And in some sense, when you look at, many of the governmental agencies, they've had to sort of straddle between helping the sort of more traditional businesses, which have, in many cases, issues and challenges associated with access to finance, like the unwillingness of banks to extend loans and the like, and the more high potential businesses that have a greater likelihood of being able to create jobs and technological innovation and exports and the like. And I think when you look at the experiences around the globe, you see that many programs have tended to diverge in one direction or the other, either towards towards the Main Street businesses or towards the high potential gazelle businesses. I think if you look, for instance, at the agenda of the Small Business Administration in the United States, probably there the dominant direction has been towards Main Street businesses. They still are responsible for for instance, the Small Business Investment Company program, which is, at least in theory, geared towards high potential businesses. But, whether correctly or not, there's been a sense that perhaps the private sector has provided enough resources for high potential businesses that their focus has largely gone towards the more traditional businesses, serving as a complement for banks in large part. I think you can point to other organizations that have gone, a somewhat different direction. I think one, interesting example that in some sense has some parallels to BPI would be, the British organization 3i, right? Which in some sense, if you go back to its origins after World War II, was really set up, with the goal of doing a lot of stuff to help businesses in Manchester and Leeds and a lot of other corners of England, many of which were, really struggling for access to capital, where a lot of the need was for debt financing and the like, though there also was an equity component. And if we think about the evolution of 3i over time, it first had a sort of shift from, debt to, from mostly debt to mostly equity. And particularly after it got, it was always sort of owned by the banks, but particularly after it went public and was sort of more under pressure in terms of generating returns and the like, shifted away from, Leeds and Manchester really to, hubs of venture activity, first within the UK and then more generally within Europe. So in that case, I think you could sort of interpret the movement of 3i as one towards really the high potential businesses, which they pursued with greater or lesser success over the years. So it is really interesting how BPI has sort of positioned themselves really with a foot in both camps and played this role. I guess one question or that I would love to hear some perspective on is how the organization has, given the complexity of this mission, evaluated its success and assessed how it's done. It's certainly very ambitious compared to many of its peers. And I would be curious as to how what kind of scorecard you use to sort of figure out if it's working or what kind of, return on investment. And I use return guardedly because I think, it's likely to include both, whatever kind of financial measures, but also the broader social measures that are here. So why don't I stop here with those initial thoughts, and I'm eager to hear, both Arnaud's thoughts as well as any kind of questions that people have.
And indeed, you ended with a question. So Arnaud, why don't you take it up? How do you evaluate yourselves?
It's a question well, it's a big question. So yeah, it's true. We have different feet in different camps, kind of true. And one of the key for the management is to make sure that these feet talk to each other. So we really think that we can, create value by having people doing venture or doing growth or doing lending, talking to each other and exchanging basically knowledge. So that's one of the challenge, because the way we operate, to answer your question, Josh, is that we have specific business lines, we have specific teams. Each business line has its own P&L and is first and foremost evaluated on his ability to reach its own financial goals. So that's one part. As a company, again, 10 business lines, basically, fund of funds, venture, growth equity, lending, guarantees, etc. Each business line has its own targets every year and has to reach them. And they operate, interestingly, for most of them across the same network. So you have guys in each branches doing most or able to connect entrepreneurs to most of the business lines. And then you have the economic impact of what we do, which is obviously key to the state and key to us. So we look at three things overall. One is growth. We need to see additional growth to the companies we finance or to which we provide consulting, etc. Second is employment, not always completely connected to growth. And third one is profitability. So employment, profitability, growth, we monitor that across our different portfolios to make sure that anytime we do something which is consuming public resources, not everything we do, it has to have an impact in terms of added growth, added profitability, added employment. So I would say it's mostly as simple as that. Obviously, we have secondary impact targets depending on the business lines. For instance, if you look at fund of funds, we have a metric which is the number of new first-time team, first-time fund financed every year. We have a target for the ones doing small tickets in growth equity, which is the number first capital, what we call first capital opening, meaning companies which were, family owned and which opened their capital base for the first time, having for the first time a financial investor at their board. So these kind of indicators we look depending on the business lines.
So you mentioned, of course, your shareholding structure, and I have tons of questions about the way that is enshrined in a framework of governance and accountability. You mentioned the fact that the banks have 2% of the capital of Bpifrance. Can you give us more of a background well, very briefly, how that came up? Why is there this kind of peripheral but still extent involvement of the private sector? But also tell us more about governance. How does the board work? What kind of accountability does the board ask you for beyond the kind of activity targets that you just referred to, and how that shapes the way you develop yourselves?
Sure. Well, really, we are managing a bank basically with a lot of equity investment activity, but again, ECB regulated, so the board has the responsibilities of a classic banking board, and us as manager also have the responsibilities of a classic banking management. So liquidity, profitability, solvency, all these kind of things we are accountable for in front of the board and in front of the ECB. And then we have a lot of strategy discussions. Most of the board, 2/3 of the board are state-related, let's say, and 1/3 are independent, mostly entrepreneurs or financial professionals. So it's an interesting mix. And you can add to that for the 2/3 which are public. 1/3 is purely state, and 2/3 is Caisse des Dépôts, which is, it's customary for us French, but maybe not for the rest of the people listening to us. So Caisse des Dépôts is a public body which is under the authority of the French Parliament. So it responds to the, how would you say it in English, legislative authority, I guess, whereas the state is the executive authority. So different kind of interests in a way. So we have to navigate these two kind of interests, make sure they fall to one view.
Is Parliament directly represented on your board, or is it entirely through the Caisse des Dépôts?
It's entirely through Caisse des Dépôts. Good point.
Okay.
And then Caisse des Dépôts has to respond to the Parliament. And for some large, obviously the large investments we would do, we have some threshold. We may go to the board for the biggest one, and for the even bigger ones, we may go to the Parliament as per the Caisse des Dépôts governance.
How did the banks become involved in equity?
Oh yeah, so it's very peripheral, as you mentioned, because it's 2%. You can see it as very centric, because being 2% in the middle between 49% shareholder can be a very interesting position. And the history for that is that a long time ago there used to be banks majority shareholders in the company which operated the state guarantees, which were provided to banks, and I guess the idea back in the 80s or 90s was that it had to be under the supervision of the banks themselves, and they had to have skin in the game in a way to make sure that
the legacy of multiple mergers, right? It's a kind of leftover from so far.
Exactly. So it's a legacy from that. They were majority in this company, and now it's 2%. It's still 600 million euros, but it's 2%. And we always thought it was good to keep them in there because they are professionals. We want to have their advice, and mostly we want to operate as a partner to them. So we don't want to start doing things that would be orthogonal to what they expect.
So I'm curious as to your reaction to this governance framework and how you compare it with benchmarks that you have studied in other jurisdictions. Is Bpifrance unique in terms of its financial construct, or do you see it as just one declination of in France of a global category? How do you look at it?
It's probably relative.
This is a question to Josh.
All right.
Oh, sorry.
Let me take. No worries. And I wish we had as more of a typology of exactly all the governance structures provided out there. We know that in a lot of cases, you see these programs directly under a ministry and, or a government department. And the worry there, of course, is that, you get into the, at least in democratic places, the sort of whipsaw effect of different administrations and agendas coming in, right? That we can point to many places. I think the US would be one of them, where you have a government agency putting together a program, touting it heavily, and then the next administration coming in and largely dismantling it, right? We can think about, going back in time to, the Clinton administration putting in the advanced technology program, which was for pre-commercial innovative research that the Bush administration dismantled. We can think more recently about the, some of the efforts that the Biden administration has done, which seem to be, focusing on clean tech, where you can say that their expected lifespan under the next administration is probably to be measured in nanoseconds rather than anything else. So, that's clearly, one model. Another approach that we've seen is one where they've tried to take a bit of an almost like central bank kind of independence kind of approach. So I think if you look at, for instance, the New Zealand Venture Investment Fund, the notion was to say, let's put this as far outside the government as we can, with the sense that this is a relative, obviously New Zealand is a small country and everybody probably knows everyone else, but where there was a sort of notion of almost like Fed-like independence, just because of problems they'd had in terms of, politicians leaning in and wanting to, push their favored companies and projects. So the notion was to say, let's build a moat around it. So the distance between, a parliamentarian and a decision to fund a company is as far as possible. So, those are sort of two extremes in terms of the kinds of approaches that are there. And then one sees a real mix of things that are, more or less formal in terms of trying to provide, some sort of structure and independence around it. This in some sense seems, a much more elaborate structure in some senses. It's obviously an older organization and also at a size and magnitude that perhaps, give it a kind of, gravitas that there's been an investment in coming up with a structure, but which is, somewhere between those two extremes of the, US program, which is just within an agency where you're going to have the, the day-to-day shifts of what's taking place, and this notion of building a moat around the program. So quite interesting.
When did the New Zealand fund get created? How long has it lasted with the moat?
I think it's basically been around, 12, 13 years. And again, it was sort of a bit of a reaction to the, the sense that earlier there had been too much interference being done by the politicians in this structure. And I think we can point to, a number of other efforts that have had some of the same, some of the same feel to it. I mean, you think about something like the, Israel Innovation Authority, a bit of the same spirit of saying, we want to give some degree of protection, given the volatile political environment, to have a more sustained kind of effort. I mean, I think in some sense you can say, and that one of the challenges here is that building these programs to encourage entrepreneurship, whether it's the Main Street entrepreneurs or the high potential ones, is really a long run kind of project. And one of the downsides of democracy, I think, is that it's harder to, with that kind of ebb and flow of parties and elections and stuff like that, in many cases it can be harder to sustain, concerted long run projects given all the challenges that are there.
I cannot resist, of course, and sorry, Arnaud, for asking this question, but given that France is not exactly showing a complete lack of political volatility these days. The strategic investment fund, the Fonds stratégique d'investissement, was a big initiative of President Sarkozy. Then came President Hollande of the central left. He created BPI, and the very name of BPI, the Public Investment Bank, has a kind of very progressive vibe. There was some continuity between Hollande and Macron. Macron used to be minister of Hollande, even so he then took a different political trajectory. So Bpifrance, as you reminded us, was created in 2013. How confident are you, and I know this is an impossible question to answer, but just to give us a sense that it can resist political, changes of directions in the future as an institution?
For one thing, the Fonds stratégique d'investissement (FSI) was merged into Bpifrance. So interestingly,
that's why I mentioned it. Yeah,
making new out of old pieces. So in a way, the new was better in the sense that we merged these things and we tried to do more than the sum of the parts in a way. But still, there was quite a continuity actually. If you look at it. We inherited the investments of the FSI and we managed them, and we inherited the teams. Some of them are still here. And basically the investment strategy of the FSI is still one of our investment strategy today. So there is this kind of continuity, and I guess long-term is the key. And the awareness that we need long-term is one of the key for sure, and that's why we are structured this way. Again, being regulated as a bank under the authority of the ECB, with a board of directors which is responsible for the decisions taken, and with a long-term view is very important. Now, what will happen in terms of government, we'll see. We haven't heard much, really different or disruptive ideas in the many debates which we have heard. But there is some kind of consensus around the fact that you need to foster entrepreneurs, you need to foster innovation, you need to support the economy. This is almost unanimously, if with a few actors recognized as a priority. So I think we are structured to adapt at least rather than to break. It's also a very agile institution.
I have a related question, which is about the banking license. You referred to it. You're supervised by the ECB. And very candidly, I don't know the answer to that question, so this is out of sheer curiosity. Why do you keep the banking license? In principle, you have the signature of the French state. You don't need to be a bank to tap the markets. So is it a governance thing? Is it a financial thing? Is it a reputational thing? What is the purpose of the banking license for you?
It's exactly a mix of these three aspects. So reputation, clearly, for the French people, knowing that the public bank, which is managing quite the balance sheet is 100 billion euros today. So it's quite a large amount, I guess, for the French people and for the parliament and for the politicians, knowing that it is under the ECB supervision is kind of reassuring. For us as an institution, it allows us to have employees which will come from private sector, go to private sector, but we operate on the same level playing field. So the metrics are the same, the reflexes, the acronyms are the same, which is also good. And financially speaking, yes, we have access to the markets, almost a proxy of the French state, but still on a daily basis, accessing the ECB can be very useful when you manage 100 billion euros of balance sheet. So it's a big constraint. We could have done without it, and you're quite right, we chose to bear the weight of the ECB regulation.
Josh, is there any parallel to that? I mean, it looks very unique to me, but that's probably displaying my ignorance. Do you know of other similar organizations that are, instead of being funds, which is basically non-banks, that have a banking license?
I was, prior to this webinar, going through the spreadsheet we have from our paper, looking at 750 programs around the world that are, essentially geared towards entrepreneurial finance or venture finance, which obviously BPI falls squarely within. And trying to find something that really was the equivalent of this. And, you can see pieces of it, right? But certainly this combination is something that it does seem to be pretty pretty unique from my review. So I do think that there are certainly some, certainly many of the elements of what Arnaud described them as trying to do. And I think some of the dynamic, the ultimate goals of saying, supporting Main Street business is important, supporting new funds is important, supporting areas like clean tech and energy transition and innovation are really important areas. You see those functional elements being repeated, but not really that particular combination in that particular structure, I think does have, some pretty unique aspects to it, which makes it very interesting.
So we have a question from Maury Kotemeki, sorry for the bad pronunciation, who asks about the financial equation, basically, of the business model of Bpifrance, and I think you've answered much of it. But he's asking, for example, whether you pay dividends. Can you give us a sense of that? And also, I have a related question about risk management. Obviously, your different business lines carry very different risk profiles. So can you give us a sense of how you manage risk holistically group-wide? And that goes a bit into the trade-offs that Josh mentioned at the beginning between mainstream and high growth. So can you give us a bit of a sense of your kind of risk philosophy?
Sure. So yes, we pay a dividend. And yes, we pay taxes, by the way. So that's two resources for the French state. Taxes on our profit and dividends. So roughly, on average, we would be around 1 billion euro of net profit after taxes. And out of that, we have a deal which is public and which is basically we pay a third in terms of dividend of our IFRS result. IFRS being a meaningful precision because obviously, given what we do, accounting methods are very important, mostly on the investment part. So in terms of business models, and in terms of
financial reporting standards, which is accounting standards that are not mandatory for all European banks, but are best practice, I would say.
Strongly recommended, let's say. So in terms of business model and risk management, yes, very different risk profiles. So two things. One, we manage capital allocation according to the risk profiles of the different business lines. And we pay great attention to that. Our solvency ratio, we have an economic approach on top of the, for instance, of the regulatory approach to make sure that things are properly managed. Second thing, which is important, we in some of our missions and businesses, we use public money. So when we invest our own funds or we manage third-party money. But sometimes, if it's a very risky strategy, which is deemed very important, we can manage money on behalf of the French state and do things which are, way too risky for a private investor. So if we have to do that, and we do that, specifically, I mentioned deep tech. In the deep tech area, early stage, we would manage public money. We used to do that in the pre-seed stages also at the time where it was deemed too difficult. Now it's a bit over, but it used to be the way. When we provide guarantees, we have guarantee funds. So it's in between model, if you will. We have guarantee funds which are taking the first losses for our guarantees, and our own funds provide for the excess loss. So we take some government money, let's say one for 50 euros of guarantees. If those 50 euros of guarantees lose more than one, then our own funds will pay for the rest. When we do credit, it's a classic net banking income margin model. And when we provide grants and subsidies, mostly for innovation, basically it's public money which we extend to the companies. And as an ECA, we operate directly. We are a service company, if you will, to the state. So we operate directly on the state balance sheets. So very different economic models depending on the businesses, and again, strong attention to the capital allocation to make sure that things stay balanced. It's also very I think an interesting exercise for the ECB, by the way, because it's kind of, you know, very specific. So they do spend also a lot of time on our capital allocation and on our risk management. And we spend a lot of time with them. But we have a very strong teams. We have very strong teams in terms of risk management, both on the credit side and on the equity side.
On risk management, your book on government programs is titled Boulevard of Broken Dreams. So that suggests that there are, you know, good and less good practices in risk management in this kind of programs. What has struck you when looking at this on a comparative perspective, and what are the things that you would, you know, first look at if you were to evaluate Bpifrance?
Well, it's a big question, and I think part of the challenge is that, you know, as Arnaud talked about, they're trying to do several different things at the same time. And, you know, many of the, you know, this is, you know, I think if you were to sort of approach it, it would be a little bit like looking at the different aspects with a set of different kinds of metrics. I think another challenge is just simply that, you know, it is so large and so important in the French economy that, you know, many of the analyses which are sort of focused on saying what is the marginal impact of this may be a little harder to assess, right? So, you know, when we think, for instance, about the entrepreneurial finance on the equity side, a lot of the questions that have been asked about, for instance, the Small Business Innovation Research Program in the US is, you know, does it serve as a, you know, is really seeing it as a sort of conduit to venture capital and saying, to what extent does this lead to venture financing rather than being a fully formed thing of its own? You know, clearly these programs in terms of the funds of funds and so forth is playing a much more important role and is much more interconnected with venture capital than would be the case of many of the, you know, more focused programs that we see in the States and in other markets. You know, at the same time, I think that you can certainly, you know, say, you know, acknowledge that, you know, we're still at an early stage at evaluating many of the aspects of these public programs. And certainly one of the big challenges is really assessing what is the overall impact. I think much of the evaluations that have been done have focused on, you know, discontinuities. Let's say that a government has a program which they lend to people with under 50 employees, but they won't lend to companies with more than 50 employees. And the question is, what is happening to, you know, if you look at companies that 48 and 49 employees versus ones with 51 and 52, do you see some sort of discontinuity or some sort of jump in terms of the ones which are at 49 employees doing more hiring or being able to do more capital investment? I think that, you know, one of the limitations of those studies is, you know, what's nice about them is they're sort of well identified and quite clean, but in many cases, it's not getting at the broader overall impact of these programs on the economy as a whole. And I think that's an area where we're still, as economists, relatively early stage in terms of really figuring out how to address these things. So I think that there would be some interesting opportunities to look at things, but I think it's still fair to say that our toolkit as economists is still somewhat underdeveloped in terms of being able to assess programs and really think about their broader economic impact.
Obviously, for a program which is as big as Bpifrance, there is this debate about crowding in or crowding out. Is it too big for the pool of investments that can go into French VC, or is it a way to develop that pool? How would you evaluate that, Josh, as an academic? How would you look at this fundamental question?
Yeah, I mean, it is a really really challenging question to really fundamentally answer, right? And then, I mean, even within the world of, development finance and emerging economies, there's been a lot of debate about how one looks at this. One can do, a sort of more general structural model and try to fit this in and then fit parameters. But in many cases, I think, I walk away from these papers being worried that there's, a lot of sensitivity to the assumptions that went into the model in terms of what comes out in terms of the results. I guess I've come, at least, wearing my policy hat as opposed to, the let's publish academic paper hat. I've become a fan of, sort of a big tent approach of using a variety of different metrics and approaches to say, let's look at this in as many different, it's almost like flying a Airbus 380. You've got all these monitors, you want to have a whole bunch of monitors looking at things in very different metrics. And the hope is that by looking at these very different measures in a variety of different ways, it can give a holistic sense of where you are, rather than just creating one measure and saying this is going to tell us the truth about where the impact of this program really is. But I think, I guess the one thing I would say is that we are still at an early stage. When you think about how much evaluation has been done on tax policy, how much evaluation has been done on, many other, education policy and health policy, in terms of innovation policy and entrepreneurial finance, we're still really at the early innings in terms of really being able to understand it.
Very interesting, and I don't know whether the reference to Acer 380 in terms of innovation is probably is a good or bad one. Arnaud, one of the things I've been very intrigued about also is the regional network. You mentioned that. Obviously, that's a legacy of the past, because some of the agencies that were merged into Bpifrance, like Envar in the olden days, or Sofaris, which you joined 20 years ago, they also had a regional network. But can you give us a sense first, how much of your 40,000 or so staff are in the regional offices as opposed to the center? And how does that dynamic between the center and the regions play out in terms of your different, businesses?
Sure. So it's a legacy of the past, but it's mostly our DNA. So we chose to keep that legacy and to nurture it and to capitalize on it. And a lot of countries and governments with which we discuss of the BPI model and how can you build that. The discussion blogs on, you need a network if you want to do these kind of things, and you cannot build a network in a few years. It takes tens of years to have a banking network which can operate efficiently. So we cherish this legacy, to the contrary of the IT legacy, for instance. So taking care of the IT, the legacy for me is always very negative term. So it's our DNA, let's say. Now we use the network for almost all our business lines, apart from investment. Most of the investment is done centrally. So we have a base of 250 front investors, professional investors, out of which you will find probably 25 in the branches, and they will do small investment in mature companies. The rest is centralized in Paris, but for credit, for guarantees, for innovative grants, for most of the small innovative grants, we will use the network. Same on the export side, same on the consulting side is a specifics. The commercialization is in the network, but the teams are centralized. And the way it works and the way we operate is really just like a classic commercial bank. We have let's say 1,500 people out of the 4,000, which are based in the regional agencies, plus the investor in a way, which is also a front office. So 2,000 front, 2,000 back. In a sense, is the way we work. One specificity for the people who know commercial banking is that we centralized risks. So decisions are taken in the branches for most of the credit operations, 95%. But there is no the risk is centralized, if you will. So the guys in the agencies are responsible for their decisions. We deploy the risk policy, but the risk guys are at the headquarters, not in the branches. So it's one-man decision. It's not a two-man decision like the ECB has tried and succeeded in most banks, pushing in the past 10 years. And that's very important for us. That really gives us, again, proximity and knowledge of small companies. You cannot pretend that you know small or mid-sized companies from Paris. We don't believe in that.
Unfortunately, we're already at the hour. I would have so many more questions. This is really a fascinating story, and I'm so grateful to Arnaud Caudoux for having lent himself to this exercise of, being grilled in a way by the two of us about all the idiosyncrasies of Bpifrance. Really fascinating. Thanks also to Josh especially for joining us while on the road in Riyadh. I know this is not logistically easy, but we're very grateful for that. Thanks, as I said, to the teams that make this series possible, and especially to Sarah Tew. Many thanks for everything you've done, and best wishes for the next steps of your career, and lots of holiday wishes to all of you in the audience. See you again at the beginning of next year. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Many thanks. Thank you. Great to talk with you guys, and thank you to everyone.